The Honda S2000 sat quietly in the far bay of his father's auto repair shop in Westchester, New York. Dust had gathered on the yellow paint, and a thin layer of oil stained air clung to the car like a soft blanket. It became the cliche project car, the one that you bought and you're patiently waiting for bills and responsibilities to be handled. That's before you can start searching for parts that are going to be likely found on Facebook Marketplace that you'll then DIY install yourself. Yeah, only this was before that era. And now, the once screaming F-20C was scattered in labeled boxes and lined up across workbenches among bearings and pistons, valves, bolts, all waiting patiently for the day it would breathe again. To anyone else, it looked like another broken down sports car. But to him, it was different. It was his car, the one he had driven through countless summers with the top down, the one that taught him to love being on the road. It wasn't about horsepower or handling. The S2000 had become a part of his story, a rolling extension of who he was. On this episode of Throttle Culture, we wrap up the story of the S2000 and bring it to its current state. There's a lot that goes into rebuilding, and some of it is emotional and painful. So let's get into it. When the block gave out, Nick thought he could just sell it. Plenty of people told him it wasn't worth the trouble, but he couldn't. Not when the car had been with him through so much. Not when he knew that rebuilding it meant more than just turning wrenches. It meant creating new memories with people who mattered most. And what else made this car so special? Well, the fact that it featured a high-revving F-20C engine, naturally aspirated 2.0-liter inline-4 capable of an astounding 9,000 RPM redline. The classic front mid-engine, rear-wheel drive layout provides balanced handling and agility. That 50-50 weight distribution is how the perfectly balanced chassis ensures stable cornering and predictable handling, making it a track beast. There's more to this yellow Honda than meets the eye, and he was willing to spend all his time and all his money to bring it back to life. From Michigan, he began the hunt. At work, he might be spending his days designing components for Ford, but at night, he became a full-time parts chaser. He ordered from everyone: OEM suppliers, aftermarket specialists, even the smaller vendors he found after hours of searching forums. He wasn't going to let shipping delays drag this out. His father's shop became the receiving dock, packages arriving daily until the counters were stacked high with brown boxes marked with part numbers and packing tape. Weeks turned into months, and he had more on his plate than expected, but that rebuild stayed on his mind. Work consumed him more than he wanted to admit, but he wanted to make a lasting impression and move up the corporate ladder quickly. He had everything he could dream of working this job. Yeah, they were long, grueling nights and days spent on his feet, carrying equipment and parts just to run analysis and testing on. So the pain was also physical just as much as it was mental. But nothing was going to delay him in his dreams. He just had to keep moving, keep pushing. And being in a new and different town, yeah, that hits different too. That makes the long days feel even longer, especially during those winter months. And makes them even sadder. Car meets just aren't the same when you're rolling around in your daily driver. Especially being in Motortown, Detroit. Don't waste this opportunity, he kept thinking. So he had to book a couple flights. Yeah, not just one, several flights over the course of a couple of months until the rebuild was finally complete. So when he first made his way back to New York, the old shop didn't just open its doors. It seemed to wake up, to take a breath. After years of silence, the air inside was stirred by the footsteps of old friends. Some were gearheads who could diagnose an engine by ear. Others barely knew a spark plug from a lug nut. But none of that mattered. They were all there for the same reason, just to see him succeed at getting the Rotten Banana to come alive again. And so every evening, his father would keep those big garage doors open, letting the warm, damp smell of the summer air drift in. mixing with the scent of oil and gasoline. Under the hum and flicker of those fluorescent lights, time started to bend. The nights began to blur together. They survived on pizza eaten straight from the box, the grease soaking through the cardboard. They drank pot after pot of bitter, burnt coffee, fuel for the long hours. They worked until their hands were caked and grimed, their knuckles scraped raw against cold metal. And through it all, his father is always seen hanging around. He's got a quiet presence, but ready to impart wisdom that only comes from years spent in the trenches of some of the most serious builds. He's a craftsman with a steady hand and a sharp mind. He hovers nearby, not taking over, but dropping the kind of knowledge that you can't find in any manual. Whenever Nick rushes or gets frustrated, his dad would just lean in and say, "Check it again." Just 3 words, but that calm voice is an anchor, pulling everyone back from the edge of frustration. There was also laughter though, like when a bolt would ping free and disappear into the shadowy depths under the workbench. And there were curses like fuck and shit muttered under breath when a part just wouldn't fit right. And then there were cheers, real triumphant shouts that echoed off the cinder block walls, the infamous night that the engine block, finally assembled, sat gleaming on the stand, like a crown jewel. But let's be clear, it wasn't all triumph to get here. Some nights ended in a heavy silence. The only sound was the clang of tools being dropped into a box, the weight of a problem they couldn't solve hanging thick in the air. They'd shut off the lights and lock the doors, the darkness feeling like a defeat. But again, the sun would rise, and they would always come back for more. So piece by painstaking piece, the heart of Rotten Banana was coming together. Pistons, smooth and perfect, slid into freshly honed cylinders with a satisfying whisper. Bearings nestled into their precise places. Head bolts were torqued down in a specific sequence, each precise click of the wrench echoing in the quiet garage. It was like music to their ears. And then, at last, the moment arrived. The rebuilt engine was cradled back in the bay. Every wire connected, every sensor plugged in. The garage itself seemed to hold its breath. Rotten Banana's proud owner slid into the driver's seat. His father stood nearby, arms folded, a lifetime of hope etched on his face. His friends gathered close, their faces smudged with grease, but every single one was lit with the shared breathless anticipation. All that work, all those late nights, came down to a single turn of a key. So there Nick goes to turn the key, and for a second, nothing. But then, the starter spins, the engine coughs, and suddenly, the shop explodes with sound. The F-20C roared back to life, filling the space with its sharp metallic wail. His friends shouted, clapping each other on the back while his father allows himself the faintest smile. The kind of smile that says, "This is why we do it." Nick sat there gripping the wheel, hardly believing it. It wasn't just an engine starting. It was proof that together they had built something worth more than the sum of its parts. And the drive back to Michigan again was unforgettable. The S2000 sang through every gear, the tack climbing higher and higher as the car devoured the miles of open road. But behind the sound of the engine, Nick heard something else, the laughter of his friends and the quiet guidance of his father, the echo of long nights in the shop. That car was no longer just a machine. It was a memory forged in sweat, laughter, patience, and love. A living reminder that sometimes the best builds aren't just about cars, but about the people who stand beside you while you bring them back to life. And that's where the journey of the Rotten Banana leaves us, battered, rebuilt, and still screaming down the road like it has something to prove. This S2000 has survived long drives, blown engines, and late-night wrenching sessions, but through it all, it became more than just a car. It became a symbol of resilience, proof that passion doesn't quit, even when metal bends and bolts snap. I hope you've enjoyed this 3-part ride into the history of a car that just refuses to die. If you've been following along, thank you for listening, sharing, and being a part of this community that sees cars as more than just machines. Don't forget to check us out on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Throttle Culture for behind the scenes clips and more stories that keep car culture alive. And hey, send this episode to your crew, your garage buddies, or that one friend who's always said they'll get an S2000 someday. This closes out the Rotten Banana saga, but trust me, there's plenty more horsepower where this came from. Stay tuned, stay loud, and as always, keep it at full throttle.